All right, the last state of consciousness that we need to look at are drugs and what those do to you. So, taking notes on this, I'll focus specifically on the things that show up the most often with drugs. Usually, it's combined with what's happening within your body, either neurotransmitters or the parts of the brain. So, use this information to kind of supplement the review for today, looking at biology and all those different elements. Right, with psychoactive drugs, the simple definition is any chemical substance that alters your mood or your perceptions. Right? The idea is that it gets into the synapses in the brain and it changes the neural communication between the neurons by either pretending to be a neurotransmitter or stopping the neurotransmitters from normally doing its job. Right now, a lot of these drugs that are psychoactive, they're illegal. Right? I use coffee every single day to get me through. So there are a lot of things like that. Different diet pills, alcohol, right? They're legal. There might be some restrictions on who has access to it. But these drugs, the reason why people take them is because they cause some positive feelings within the body. What makes them dangerous is when you become too reliant on it, too in need of having that drug within your system. And so it's that altered perception or mood that might go beyond the realms of what is healthy for an individual. Right? If these drugs didn't cause good feelings, no one would ever become addicted to them. No one would ever become dependent on them. Right? So we're going to look at some of the positive effects by talking about the good reasons for why people take them. Not that it's good to take drugs, but just the good feelings that they experience. And then we'll also talk about the negative consequences of misusing drugs. Right? Dependence is built on continual, consistent use. And by doing this over time, it's going to build your tolerance. In order to experience a high, you need a larger dose of that drug. Right? The reason why that happens is because your brain tries to stop these drugs from taking effect. Your brain wants to keep normal functionality. And so when you take these drugs that alter your perceptions and your mood, your brain gets used to that and is like, well, this isn't normal. So it actively tries to fight against the drug within the system by either not producing natural hormones and neurotransmitters you're used to having within your body or naturally slowing down brain reactions anyway. So what happens is the drug isn't as effective because your brain's fighting against it. And so in order to experience a high, you need to take larger and larger quantities of this drug. Doing that doesn't mean that your body is able to process all those drugs. Right? There's still a physical limit in the quantity of the drug within your system that you can tolerate without suffering severe damage and overdosing. And so some people who are addicted to drugs, they have such high tolerance levels that they will easily overdose because they're still trying to reach that high that their body just can't physically process anymore. Right, what also leads to people continued use of drugs is that we also suffer from withdrawal. Right, while the drugs in our system, it's changing the way that our body's reacting. And so part of that neuro changes as your body tries to fight the drug is that it will stop producing natural neurotransmitters. And so when the drug's out of the system, we don't have that cushion of the neurotransmitters that should be there to help us normally function. So for example, opioids, while that drug's in your system, they act as intense painkillers. Well, that's because you have natural painkillers constantly circulating throughout your body. But by continued use of that drug, your body stops producing those painkillers. It assumes the drug is doing the job for you, so the body doesn't produce them anymore. So then, when you don't have the drug within your system, your body feels this intense, debilitating pain because those natural painkillers you're supposed to have just aren't there anymore. A lot of drug users will say that they have a hangover the next day, where they just feel depressed and sad. This is common with alcohol or ecstasy. Well, the reason why that happens is because it depletes your serotonin levels, your feel-good neurotransmitter. And so if you use it all up on this ecstasy moment, there's nothing for you the next morning, the next day to help you feel better. And so you feel emotionally depressed. So these withdrawal symptoms, they can be physical or psychological. And it builds up in us this need for the drug. In order for me to get through the day, I feel like I have to have it within your system. And that's when it moves from a dependency into an addiction. An easy way to tell the difference is pretend like your phone is the drug, right? A lot of you are probably dependent on your phone. You want to have it with you all the time. When it's not in your pocket, you get anxious. But if we were at school and you realized, oh my gosh, I left my phone at home, would you be able to get through the day without your phone? Maybe annoyed, but you could function. You could still pay attention in class and get through all your lessons, right? That's dependency. But addiction would be like, oh my gosh, I cannot get through the day without the phone. You might skip school, drive home and get it. You might be so distracted by the lack of phone on your person that you would not be able to listen to your lectures in class. You wouldn't be able to get through all the different lessons. And so addiction is when it disrupts your day-to-day life. And it's usually because of these withdrawal, psychological, or physical symptoms that you're feeling. There are a lot of treatment programs for people to overcome addiction, but there's also high success rates for people overcoming their addictions on their own. Depending on the drug and the physical changes that it does to your body, some of them are easier to overcome than others. For example, opioids, they have a very high addiction rate because of the vast physical changes within your body. It's a little bit harder to them for your body to kick the habit. But a lot of people, once they've kicked the habit, they can stay off the drug for a long time. This is common with like smokers. So there might be a few moments of relapse, but there are a lot of treatment programs or individually focused programs where people can overcome their addictions. Oops. All right, so let's look at the different categories of drugs, and I'll talk about specific ones. All right, depressants are drugs that slow down neural activity. It lowers the speed at which neurons communicate with each other by stopping that natural, normal process. Right? What alcohol does is it lowers our sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight response that we have. And so in low doses, it can be relaxing. A lot of adults, when they have a hard day at work, they might have a drink to ease the tensions as they get home or to celebrate something that happened. And so in low doses, it can produce a relaxing effect. But as you take larger and larger quantities, as you drink more and more, by attacking that sympathetic nervous system, it also starts to impact your central nervous system. Your parts of your brain start to slow and shut down. So for example, your frontal lobe, that's one of the first regions that tend to be impacted. So that's why we have slow reaction times. Our speech is slurred because that Broca's area in your frontal lobe, that's being impacted. And your moral judgments, being able to think things through and be like, is this the right choice? Is this the smart thing to do? All of that is impacted because of the lowering activity level in your frontal lobe. Right? As it progresses and as you drink more and more, it could also impact your limbic system. People that are drunk are very quick to anger because of that amygdala response. It also impacts your hippocampus a lot. Your hippocampus is your memory formation centers. And so what we find is that people have difficulty processing their short-term memories while they're drinking large quantities of alcohol. They might experience a blackout where there are just moments of time throughout the night, throughout the day that they just cannot recall because their hippocampus went to sleep and their body stayed awake and kept doing things. And if you drink more and more and more, what we find is that there tends to be a shrinkage in your brain. Because of this depression of the neural activities for extended period of times, those neurons atrophy and they die, and so your brain shrinks in size. It has less active neurons and less neural connections, synapses for things to work. And so depressants tend to be the most common drug that people use, and alcohol tends to be the biggest depressant that people use. Another one, it's not really used that much anymore, but they're barbiturates. These are like sleep aids, and so a lot of old school sleep aids, they would use barbiturates as the main chemical tendencies. There are a lot of sleep aids on the market now that use synthetic melatonin, and those tend to be safer and they don't tend to have a large withdrawal effect. But barbiturates could have also been used. Right? They mimic the effects of alcohol, but they work at a faster rate, and they lead to intense feelings of tiredness and sleepiness. So it's not necessarily the alert relaxation that alcohol causes. It's more of the relaxation, I need to go to sleep type feeling. If you combine it with other depressants, it's highly lethal, and so there's a higher risk of overdosing with barbiturates. But again, what it does is it slowly shuts down the different parts of the brain, but this one can also react with your brain stem, and so mess with your medulla that's supposed to be regulating your breathing and your heart rate naturally. And so you need to be careful with barbiturates, especially if you're using other depressants in your system. Opiates sometimes are called depressants, but they're their own category. So opium, morphine, heroin, these are all opiates. What they do is they depress neural activity, but by mimicking your body's natural painkillers. So it's not slowing down the neuron by blocking neurotransmitters from being able to do their job, like alcohol and barbiturates. Right? This one, it pretends to be neurotransmitters. Naturally, your body's natural pain-killing neurotransmitters. And so it floods your body with all these endorphins so that you feel highly relaxed and euphoric and happy. And it's because it's mimicking your body's natural painkiller neurotransmitters. Right? But as I mentioned before, by having these within your system, your body stops producing those pain-killing neurotransmitters, and you can experience very severe withdrawal effects. It can be very damaging. There's high rates of craving because along with mimicking these neurotransmitters or painkillers, they also release high levels of dopamine. It causes your body to release your dopamine, your euphoric neurotransmitters. And so people constantly crave that other fix because it was so motivating and rewarding that they want to go out and try another one. And so there's a lot of debilitating pain and this feelings of depression and sadness that can be linked with opioids. And so that's why it's such a crisis right now in many regions of the country. We could also use stimulants. These are things that speed up neural activity. So caffeine, nicotine, methamphetamines, cocaine would all be stimulants. Right, what they do is they cause changes in your energy and your mood patterns by mimicking your body's natural excitatory neurotransmitters. And so they speed up neural activity so that you start doing more and more. It can be used to help you stay awake. Sometimes it can be used to lose weight because it speeds up your metabolism. But there is a crash when the caffeine leaves your system. Instead of feeling awake and alert, you might feel more tired and more irritable. People feel physically exhausted, and they can be highly addictive. Nicotine, it changes the structure of your brain so that you constantly want that next hit. There's a lot of truth campaigns out there talking about what nicotine does. Right? Caffeine, the same thing. Your body gets so used to those artificial stimulants from the drug that it stops producing its own excitatory neurotransmitters. So that when you don't have it in your system, you feel tired. It also has a dehydrating effect. And so when you don't have the drug within your system, you can also feel very dehydrated and experience these intense headaches. And so these drugs do have a physical withdrawal effect and physical side effects, just like maybe opioids do. Right? Cocaine tends to be the most dangerous in the stimulant category. It's highly addicted. There are people who've used cocaine once and become addicted right away. Crack is derived from cocaine, and so they have similar characteristics, but it's a more concentrated form, so it can also be highly addictive in that sense. Right, so what it does is it leads to a burst of release in all of your dopamine and your serotonin, and so it's highly excitatory and you feel euphoric. So just like heroin makes you feel highly euphoric, but I need to take a nap and just lay here and feel fine, Cocaine is, I feel highly euphoric and great. I need to go out and do all of the things. It enters into your bloodstream, so it's not just reactive within your brain, it's reactive in the synapses throughout your body. So some people also might feel a tactile sensation where they're more alert and aware of all of your sensations. Right? But by doing that, it depletes your dopamine, your serotonin, and your norepinephrine, all of those feel-good neurotransmitters that give you energy. And so because it gives such a quick high, but also leads to such a quick crash, people will be driven to repetitively take it throughout a night. And so it has a very high addiction rate because of those quick hits, but also with the quick crash that comes after it. Ecstasy tends to be another stimulant that can be addictive, not as high as cocaine. This is more of a synthetic, and it has a mild hallucinogenic experience, mostly with tactile sensation. So things feel a lot better, smoother, more present. It produces a moment of euphoria and a feeling of social intimacy, and that's because it's releasing all your serotonin and then preventing it from going back into the neuron. And so it's stuck in the synapse over and over and over again. Ecstasy has a slow build and a slow wear off, and so it's not going to give the instantaneous high like cocaine does, and it is sustained over an extended period of time, so there isn't that quick crash. So it's not as addictive, but it does lead to a deplenishing of your serotonin levels. It can lead to cases of dehydration, severe overheating while the drug is within your system. There used to be a really silly, stupid drug awareness commercial that would come on where they would show you an egg and be like, this is your brain. And then they would show a frying pan, and they would crack the egg into the frying pan. And they would say, this is your brain on drugs. That's kind of what happens to your brain on ecstasy. Your hypothalamus loses the ability to regulate your body temperature. And so you can run temperature rates of 104, 106 degrees, and that's beyond what your body can process. It's a dangerous temperature level, and so it does lead to dangers with overheating, and then combined with dehydration, it can lead to organs shutting down. So you have to be a little careful while using this drug by looking at these quantities. But since it's like a club drug, you often might not know how it was made, what's in it. Some of them can be mixed with other drugs, so like LSD with ecstasy. So it can be a very dangerous drug where you don't know the quantity until it's already in your system and you see how your body's responding. It can mess with your circadian rhythm, making your sleep cycles a little bit more difficult to process, falling into those good levels of REM sleep. So ecstasy does have some long-term effects, but it tends to be more psychologically addictive because that desire for serotonin. So there's an increased risk of depression for consistent ecstasy users. Right, hallucinogens, that's the last category that we're going to look at. Right, hallucinogens, they can be synthetic or natural. So LSD is a synthetic hallucinogen. It's chemically similar to serotonin, but it interacts with the brain in such a way where it either prevents serotonin from bonding, and so it's a depressant in that sense, or it mimics serotonin and it excites things, and so you get more of a reaction. And so depending on what's, not strain, but like what brand of LSD, it can either have an excitatory and inhibitory effect. And so users, they describe seeing kaleidoscopic colors around them. Sounds have a visual sensation. So visions tend to be the biggest hallucination that they experience. It can be a positive reaction or a negative reaction. And so your mental frame of mind tends to play a role. If you expect a good trip, it tends to be a positive experience. But if you're maybe anxious or nervous about it, it could lead to a negative, a bad trip. But what LSD also does for some users is that it actually leaves a chemical residue on the brain. It stays in your system. You don't lose it, which means there are things called acid flashbacks, where even though you haven't taken the drug and you're just like living your normal life, suddenly the drug reactivates and you experience these hallucinations again. So, like, you could be perfectly fine, you're sitting in class, and all of a sudden everything starts to turn colors and moving. And if you're like at your job or if you're driving, that can be detrimental because you can't continue with your presentation if you're seeing giant rabbits running around the room. And if you're driving, that puts you and other people at danger. You can't accurately navigate the road because what you see isn't reality. And so for some users, this LSD stays within the system, and it leads to continual flashbacks to these hallucinations that they experienced. Right? Marijuana is also a hallucinogen. It's a natural hallucinogen. It's based off of THC found in the hemp plant. There's also synthetic marijuana, the CBD oils. It's supposed to give the relaxing effects that marijuana does, but it doesn't give the euphoric high that comes along with it. And so CBD is easier to get a prescription for because it gives the calming relaxation elements without necessarily the high of distorted perceptions of reality. Right? But THC, it will give that hallucinogenic high. Right? It varies depending on the situation. There's different ways to ingest THC, and so depending on how you're getting it within your system, it'll change the situation. But it gives a euphoric state, a sense of calm relaxation by releasing levels of dopamine. And so it's stimulating neural activity that can lead to hallucinatory experiences. Some of them might be mild, so mild tactile or taste or sound experiences, but some of them can be more extreme. And so it can lead to emotional experiences. For some individuals, they have a bad reaction where it actually makes them feel more depressed or more anxious, more paranoid. But it's also a good pain reliever. Some individuals that are going through chemotherapy, they could get a prescription for medical marijuana to help with the pain that they're suffering from this disease that they have. With higher quantities of marijuana within your system, it can impair your perception, coordination, reaction times. There's been a ton of controlled studies showing that marijuana use can be just as bad as alcohol use when trying to drive. The only problem is we can easily test alcohol levels in drivers by using a breathalyzer, but there's no similar way of testing marijuana levels within users. And so we don't have state mandates on what's a legal limit, but we do know that smoking and driving is dangerous because it impairs your reality. It can lead to high rates of cancer and lung damage. It can lead to pregnancy complications. For example, a lot of marijuana use actually lowers sperm levels within males, and so even if they are not taking the drug anymore, but they used it a lot when they were younger, as adults, they just don't naturally produce enough sperm that can lead to conception issues. Women that smoke while they're pregnant, they also have a higher risk of deformities within the babies, specifically cognitive deformities, and so there's developmental delays within the child going through the natural like maturity levels. They tend to be a little bit behind the normal age group gaps. And so most of what THC is doing is changing those activities within your frontal lobe and the limbic system. And so that's why there's cognitive and mood changes, because it's highly reactive within those regions of the brain. All right, so that is our notes for today. Use this information to help you with today's free response question. And if you want, I'll be Zooming and reviewing biology today, so feel free to stop on by.